All right, we're live.
We're live.
And there'll be maybe a few people joining us.
Yes.
But welcome to Writing and Fighting. It is May 29th, 2020. And what a semester it's been. I am so glad to have our guest here, who I've been following for a few years now, and I've had some wonderful conversations with. It is Gareth A Davies. And he is a multi-award-winning journalist with 3 decades in journalism, 25 years with Telegraph, 15 years with radio with TalkSPORT, as well as 12 years on television with BT Sport, Fox, ESPN, Setanta Sports, and he's a go-to voice on boxing and has also pioneered mixed martial arts into mainstream coverage. He has presented over 30 documentaries in the name of MMA, BT Sports. He's a voice artist, including box analysts on live broadcasts, record-breaking nights at Wembley Stadium and the Millennial Stadium. But a storyteller by nature, Gareth has found himself drawn to fight sports by the narrative of its protagonists and the triumph of the human spirit in an often unforgiving and environment. Which, as we're going to go on, I'm going to introduce our other students and panelists, Gareth, but I'm going to come back to you because that narrative of storytelling is something I'm very interested in.
Yes.
And I think what I loved about the challenge of the Diaz brothers, the elusive fighters, is you use some interesting literary devices and the voice of you, the journalist, to harness, and what you were able to do is actually help the reader understand Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz in a way that I don't think I had ever seen done before. So, Josh, are you there?
I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Josh, it was black and we didn't see. Can you? This is our panel for today, starting off, and I want to introduce also Josh. Can you tell everyone about your background?
Yeah, I'm Josh Rosenblatt. I was the editor-in-chief of Fightland, and I have a book out now called Why We Fight. And as I've said before, I'm now essentially a full-time panelist on the Writing and Fighting online video, whatever we call these things, podcast, Zoom, conference,
webinar.
I'm a cog in the great Nancy Kidder wheel at this point.
Thank you, Josh. More than that. And writing partner.
And writing partner, yes, absolutely.
Not published writing partner.
Who needs to be published?
Yes, exactly. All right, Atticus, please tell us about yourself.
Hi, Atticus. I'm a former student of Professor Kidder's. I huge combat sports fan, have been for a while. Just love to hear all the super cool, super unique points of view from people here.
Excellent. Thank you, Atticus. Gareth, he tests my knowledge of MMA. So it's, and I'm like, you've been alive since what, 2001?
2000.
2000.
I've had the whole millennia.
He doesn't remember the world before MMA.
I know.
He doesn't remember human cockfighting and the outrage and the moral panic.
Girl. Yes, but he was 5 when Chuck Liddell fought Tito Ortiz and knows it better than I do. So
I know.
Tells you a lot. All right, now, Gareth, back to storytelling and kind of the discovery of fighters in more of a long form way. Actually, I'm going to back it up because I want to know more about your story. We've talked a little bit. You got your start in journalism in China. Is that correct? Not the typical starting point for a sports journalist.
Yeah, well, long before Atticus was born, I found myself in 1988, 89 in Beijing, China, where I lived for a year, and I was doing all kinds of things over there, really. I was teaching English, being quite subversive, I think, in the end, and ended up very involved in covering Atticus may not remember, I'm sure Josh will, the Tiananmen Square incident and the kind of revolution that went on from kind of May into June that year. And it was my first experience of reporting and filming and kind of being in the square every day for about 4 or 5 weeks and seeing a kind of revolution going on in front of your face. I don't know if you've ever seen the film A Year of Living Dangerously with Mel Gibson when he was in Jakarta. Very interesting, and he was a journalist then. It was very much like that, where I was illegally living in the People's Daily newspaper compound. They thought I was a student at the university. My parents had been in China, and I'd originally gone to see them, and they'd left, and I stayed on. I studied Chinese for a year and lots of martial arts and wushu and qigong and different things, which was brilliant. I went there to kind of learn about energy, if you like, energy in martial arts. And Chinese the life there was much slower then. And so I started kind of stringing, if you like, as they call it, helping kind of bona fide journalists who were working with national newspapers out there and recording and reporting on the revolution, if you like. It was a very big event. I mean, it was a global event at the time. All the world's cameras were trained on it. Everybody remembers that picture or that little video of that man standing in front of the tank. That typifies, I think that was the kind of media moment. But I had already moved into the People's Daily newspaper compound about 4 or 5 months earlier. And I didn't have a pass for the compound, but in the danways or the work units in China, the back door was always open and there were guards on the front of basically at the time, the danway, a work unit, was the newspaper itself, but everybody who worked on the newspaper lived inside the compound, and they had schools in there, and there was one block for foreign journalists that put out the China Daily, which was an English language paper that came out every day as well. But the point being about the People's Daily, it was the Communist Party's organ, if you like. It was their paper. And so I was living there while the revolution went on, and kind of illegally just paying the caretaker of the block of flats $20 a week to stay there, and it had its own toilet and shower and all those kind of things and a couple of rooms. It was quite exciting. But I was in Tiananmen Square reporting every day. But then martial law was declared about 3 weeks before June the 4th, which was when the tanks and the soldiers came in and probably killed about a couple of thousand students and protesters who were all living in the square in tents. And at that point, I really had to get rid of a lot of equipment, like cameras and stuff I had. And it was very, very interesting. And I was always able to get in and out of the compound. The point being that the People's Daily newspaper suddenly started printing anti-government propaganda. So the secret police and martial law was declared. They took over the compound. So I had to be very careful from that point on to get rid of my doobies and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't want to get caught and put in a Chinese gulag for 25 years because that wouldn't have been nice, eating cardboard and whatever they feed people there. But it was an amazing experience. I had grown up with my parents traveling abroad a lot and working abroad in the Foreign Service. So I thought I would probably end up as a foreign correspondent at that point. But then I had children very soon after I came back from China. And it's too difficult to do that. And I'd always been into sports. I played a lot of cricket and rugby, always into martial arts. So I alighted on a career in sports journalism instead of traveling. But I think one of the things about fight sports or being a fight correspondent, and I'm kind of an old school correspondent as well as being a kind of probably a little bit of a dinosaur in the modern world. Sometimes I like social media, sometimes I don't. And that basically some of my mentors, when I started off writing about boxing in about 1992, were saying, it's the best job. It's the best job in sports journalism because you get to write about the most fascinating people, and I'm fascinated by people who fighting spirits. And I think you get to do almost a foreign correspondence job because there's a lot of travel around the world with different fights, and you're using a lot of language that people use when they're covering war, when they're covering kind of extreme circumstances. So there's a lot of opportunity to actually write, you know. And so like Josh will no doubt have spoken about before, one of the moras of Fightland was why I fight, you know. And so, you know, one of the moras of writing is why I write, you know, what the reason is, why you have passion for a long time for it. And I think it's one of the most interesting spheres that there is to be involved in terms of writing. And it does give you a lot of scope for writing features. And like you say, using kind of writing vehicles, the, you know, types of vehicles that you can write, like you mentioned with the Nick and Nate stories. You can do news reports, you can do features, you can delve into so many aspects, so many nuances and layers of people's lives. And you know, I mean, I understand fighters, definitely. I have it in me. I'm very competitive, and you know, there's a lot of struggles going on all the time. And I think it's a very moving mindset industry and a very creative industry. So it has fitted with me. So I've just lived life like an international rock star for 30 years while getting a bit of work done, basically.
Hey, Gareth, I was curious. I love what you're talking about. And I was curious with your familiarity with China and with the traditional martial arts, but also your fascination with, like you were saying, how fighting sort of opens up the opportunity to talk about other deeper issues. What is your feeling about, I don't know his name, I can't remember his name right now, but the Chinese martial artist, mixed martial artist, who's been sort of going around and challenging traditional martial artists to fights, and his sort of ongoing war with the Chinese government. I'm very curious what you have to say about all that.
Oh, the one that I can't remember his name myself right now. I have written about him in the past, actually. What you mean? Is he a wushu guy?
He's the guy that he's the actual mixed martial artist who's challenges these traditional guys and then sort of
beats the shit out of them.
Beats up a Tai Chi guy.
That's right. Him.
And
yeah.
The Chinese government is really seeing it as an attack on their mythology.
Traditionalism. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, it's very similar to the debate about Bruce Lee, who's one of the reasons Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee were the two heroes I had when in the 70s when I was a 10-year-old boy, who I found so inspiring because they were bigger than the martial arts. They were, you know, Bruce Lee always had a rose for the girl at the end of his fights, didn't he? He was a lover and a fighter. And Muhammad Ali transcended his sport and was probably the most well-known person on earth at some point during his career. And I think it's that debate with Bruce Lee. What would he have? Would he have been a Manny Pacquiao? Would he have been a great? I think he would have been a brilliant fighter. I think we'd have loved him in real fights, in mixed martial arts and boxing. I think he'd have been amazing. But it's that debate about whether does a traditional martial arts, where I did wushu, okay, for like 8 months, 9 months in China, with a kun. It's a stick. It's like a kendo fighting art. And I really loved it. But I can remember the first 5 classes were literally half an hour, putting your foot up, and stretching your body. And it was like seems like a 50-year process to become a master. So it was, I think the concepts of it are right. And I think a lot of those values, in spite of modern mixed martial arts being a very commercial sports entertainment venture, there is, if you look closely, there is a deep respect and love for martial arts. Like you talk to a lot of the great coaches, Winklejohn, Jackson, Roach in boxing, some of our guys here, Adam Booth, Ben Davison, Brandon Gibson, Javier Mendez, Trevor Whitman. Duke Rufus, that you talk to all of them, and I know all of them very well, and I love to intellectualize with them, that there's a moment where you talk to all of them where, and I completely agree with this, that they say part of our objective is not just to make them a better fighter, but a better person. And I think that's the cradle of martial arts. It teaches you to back out facing in the street, if you like. That's the best policy. It teaches young people not to be frightened of physical contact. It teaches a respect for, I hate street violence. It's one of the things on social media that does millions of views, but it does make me feel sick, street violence. But when you see people who are trained to fight and how they are calm in certain situations, that's what I believe is the reason for martial arts. And when I was in China, I really enjoyed the level of people, certainly when I was there, you know, and it's nearly 30 years ago, or it's over 30 years ago, people were really trying to understand in an old way. And I went there seeking the old ways in China, trying to understand how you use your energy. I know that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's how I see it anyway, you know. So the guy doing what he's doing at the moment, you know, I don't think traditional forms of martial arts are necessarily work in mixed martial arts, because they have become fast-moving fighting, you know, sports entertainment. And I think it's a world away from learning those traditional martial arts over maybe 4 or 5 decades in someone's life.
So I have to ask, you know, with the globalization, especially of MMA, you know, we know that UFC is invested in growing their Chinese market, and now we have Weili Zhang. Is there going to ever be this, like, it seems like you say that, you know, these traditional are the cradle, but could some people also see that there's this fighting against each other, where the traditional should not be, a lot of people want to keep the traditional and not expand into kind of the more modern MMA?
Yeah, I mean, there'll always be the traditional, and there'll always be, you know, kids that do. I think the traditional will probably be the amateur, the kind of, you know, the Corinthian side of our sports. But, you know, the Weili Zhangs of this world, the elite who fight to make a great living from it. And remember, probably only, I think the statistics are that probably about 3% of fighters make enough money to retire and do something with it. You know, most of them open gyms now and things like that, don't they? And so they can be in what is their office, place that they're comfortable. You know, they're kinetic people, and they'll always want to be kinetic. They're never going to go into very few will go into an office job afterwards or become a lawyer or those things. They're kinetic people. They're drawn to it. It's a calling. So I think there'll always be something of a like a precipice or a gap between what happens with traditional martial arts and mixed martial arts. Because at the end of the day, and it's a bit like writing stories about people, you know, traditional newspapers do news, you know, and online MMA sites, boxing sites do news. But ultimately, people want to be entertained, and they're entertained now by the fights themselves. Like, I can put out the greatest, deepest interview with someone on an Instagram kind of video for Bellator or the UFC, or a UFC fighter, or a Bellator fighter, or a boxer, and it might get 50,000 hits. But if you've got a thrilling knockout, it can get 1 million hits. You know, so it's a little bit like, you know, it's a bit like the rubbernecking of, like, I saw the other day the 2 guys having a fight outside their house in the pandemic. It was one tall guy. Robin Black even ended up analysing it. Spinning back kick to the guy's face knocked him against the car. Or a llama headbutting a girl at an open zoo. You know, like, I mean, it's like Bink, as Robin does, and Robin's a friend of mine. But I just think that's like, it's like the shittiest tabloid story with the girl with her tits out. You know, people look at it, but it's not lasting. It's ephemeral. Whereas I'm quite happy to do long form, and it doesn't matter to me that only 10,000 people or 500 people have a look at it now. People go back to it when they want to read about someone, and they go, "Oh, that's interesting." So I think there's always a place for those deeper stories, if that's the right answer to what you're asking.
But if you're trying to get your foot in the door, like Atticus here, who
All right.
wants to write, how do you stay true to that, knowing that you want to get those hits? You want to be able to move up the ladder, because I appreciate the long form. I also appreciate going against the grain of a cliched kind of article that, you could easily put the Diaz brothers in this rags to riches story, right? From Stockton, and now, they're coming up, they've got their businesses, their gym, but you go against that, especially, with the Kafka bringing in that story of Kay, who's locked in his a castle that he can't get ownership to.
Yeah.
That story, because when I read that, I actually kind of I feel so bad for Nick Diaz, because I feel like you say fighters, they're kinetic. But I see someone who fighting was his only choice, and he would do anything. He is a smart, intellectual guy, but he's locked in it. So I guess my point, that was a rambling statement. Is it hard to maintain this idea of storytelling?
No, not at all. No, not at all. And I think the key to it is do what you're comfortable with and be yourself always, because I've been doing this a long time, and I know what I enjoy doing. I love being on the road. I love being on tour. It's very hard at the moment in lockdown. But I think if you're good face to face with people and you're fascinated by someone, if I was starting out now, what I would do, if I was Atticus, I'd pack all his things into the back of that van, and I would go and live outside the gym in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I would spend a year documenting John Jones. And I would spend the first 2 months being what they would call in the old school eyes and ears, okay? Not talking, not trying to get the big interview, but basing yourself around someone who is extraordinarily fascinating, which John Jones is. He's one of the most fascinating fighters on earth, along with, the likes of Conor McGregor, who you wouldn't be able to get near to, like the Diaz brothers, like Tyson Fury, like Mike Tyson is still. I would go and base myself there, sleep in the van. If you might not even get to speak to them for the first month, but just say to them, you're going to make it in this industry, and you want to just observe their practices for a time and make yourself the expert on that person. Because if they see your dedication, this is what I would do. Yeah, because if you did that for 6 months, you'd have a book, you would have deeper insights into the people, you would learn how to be around a group of extraordinary people there, with not just, they've got other people there, of course. They've got Holly Holm there, who's fascinating, Carlos Condit, who's fascinating, Brandon Gibson, Mike Winklejohn, Greg Jackson. These are people who read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, who encouraged John Jones to flick open a page and read about the practices of war. John, I had John in my car in London when he was about 19 or 20 before he was world champion. We were caught in a traffic jam, and I interviewed him for 3 hours, and we really did have a great connection. And I had Thiago Alves, Malky Kawa, and Vanderlei Silva in the back of my car as well. So it was a pretty cool, if a street fight had broken out, I'd have just sat in the car and just chilled. Do you know what I mean? Because I'd have been totally, if a revolution had gone off, I'd have been fine. Malky jawing in the back, of course. John telling me his life story, and Vanderlei and Thiago Alves just kind of, chatting away in Portuguese. I think that's what I would do. And you would get news stories from that. You would get deeper stories, and you would get a study on something. It would give you a basis for understanding how a great gym operates, how the sport operates at macro and micro levels. But maybe the most important thing, and Nancy and I have spoken about this privately, the way you survive for a long time in this industry and be able to do it all and go face to face with people, and people respect you. And I want people's respect in the world. I don't care what, I can give a monkeys, I can give a fuck what other journos think about me. And I don't, because I know how I do my job. No one does it better than I do in terms of the way I do it. And I like to get up close with fighters, and I like them to know that they can trust me. And there's an old saying that the best stories you get, you actually never write, you know? And what I mean by that is, when you get the deep, I know this is a long answer, I'll come to an end in a minute. When you get the deep trust of fighters and teams, and you know, I have it with Tyson Fury. I've been in his dressing room twice before his last two Deontay Wilder fights. That's a great privilege. And the privilege comes from having been around those people, and they know that some of the things they've told you about them aren't for publication. It's about a deeper level of trust. There are things that you've done, Atticus, that you don't want written about already in your life, yeah? Whatever it is, and we all have those things. And I think I'm very aware of that because I've had a life as well, you know? Like, I know how to live. And, you know, I think we have to respect the humanity of other people, and not everything they do is a story. So that's an answer to your question, Nancy. The advice to Atticus, that's what I would do if I was starting out now.
No, I love that idea, because you always want the big break, right? Your big.
You don't. The big break is bollocks. The big break is longevity and respect over a long period of time, and the body of your work. That's the big break. There is no big break. You can, you know, like a friend of mine, Ariel, he had a big break in a weird way when obviously he got thrown out of a UFC event, and it was a really big break for him because it made him a very famous person in that sense, and it really gave him a hike up because he became the story. But it doesn't, getting the great scoop, I've had loads of scoops, loads of exclusives, and it doesn't, I personally believe it's the body of work over a long period of time. For example, I'm not comparing myself to Picasso, but I'm a real fan of, my first degree was Spanish and Italian, massive fan of Velázquez, Goya, Picasso, like the great Spanish artists. And in the end, Picasso's body of work meant that his pieces in the end weren't that great, but it was a Picasso. Do you know what I mean? And and I've experienced it in a teensy weeny way, that sometimes people go, oh, I really love that story you wrote. And I thought, no, I've written 1,000 stories better than that. But it's just, your reputation over a long period of time is very important. And as Ant Evans, who you had on the show recently, I had you on your lectures recently. I'm calling it a show. It's like a show. Everything's a fucking show these days. Is that, well, everyone's a fucking broadcast. Everything's a show.
We're trying to make it smarter by saying it's a class. You know.
A class. Yeah. Well, I hope I'm imparting some things that you might learn from.
You are, and no, and yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because the other thing that we've been talking about, and I think this is something that's not brought up with writers. And Josh, I'd like to have your thoughts on this too, and Atticus, challenging your subject. Because we talked about this. I just recently watched Muhammad Ali, Holmes. They had a documentary on Ali versus Holmes. One of his second to last fight. I don't know, Josh, have you seen this? It is so depressing. There is no way Ali should be trained for a fight. You already see the slur of the words. You already can just see that he's not doing well. You hear that physically he had to take like a diuretic or some sort of thyroid medication to lose weight. And it's just, you see him kind of also just just like as a tourist attraction to people coming by his camp. And we brought this up because the way you possibly challenge your subject sometime with Diaz in terms of you won't just give up or won't just give the answer that would a reporter who was just phoning it in would. Can you go more on that? Because I think you also said something about there's greatness about Ali, and sometimes we don't want to challenge that as a writer.
Is that Josh?
No, I think, well, it's to you.
Oh, to me. Okay.
Yeah. Challenging
Josh,
greatness.
Josh just fell off his chair, I think.
Oh, we always have some sort of movement with Josh.
Yeah, you didn't fall off your chair, Josh, no?
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, it's the it's the living at home and having other people in the house and having to negotiate videos and making sure things aren't seen, that sort of thing.
Before I answer that question from Nancy, do you agree or disagree with some of those bits of advice I was giving to Atticus or someone starting out?
Oh my God, I think that advice is real. I'll be honest, I'm afraid to give that kind of advice. For one thing, I'm not a reporter. I am a literature professor that curates and analyzes. So that's why I feel.
But if you don't do that, Nancy, if you don't do that, you're like every fucker else out there. If you don't do that, you're like everyone else out there. You know, I don't know what you think about that, Josh.
Well, I thought it was totally fascinating advice. More than the specific advice, the thing that I like that you're saying that I totally agree with, and this is also in relation to what Nancy was asking, is I think the only sin for me, the only thing I can't abide is writing a story that I think someone else could have written. And I'd be curious what you have to say about that, Gareth, because regardless of what the specifics are, I think it's fascinating that you'd say, go plant yourself, live in the van, in the parking lot, because that's a different kind of an angle. For me, I would never do that. I'm just not that kind of guy. But I think it's a similar attitude in that the thing I can't tolerate is the idea that if I've written a story that I feel like other people have written, I want to throw myself off a bridge.
Yeah, well, I try not to read what other people do because I couldn't give a monkey's what they do, frankly. You know. No,
you're absolutely right, and
that's another thing, Atticus. Like, and I don't mean don't follow the sport and be up on things, but like my, I obviously I'm older than you, and I am an old school journalist, and we had a real apprenticeship in journalism when I was, I started on the Telegraph at 25, and I was taught by the guy that we had correspondence for the weather, for transport, for education, they were all specialists, and they used to get you fucking drunk every day. That's what they did. Everyone used to go drinking at lunchtime. That was the culture, and like they took you under their wing and they taught you things. And one of the things that one of my old sports editors said to me was, Gareth, you are different. Go and be different with everything you try to find the stories that are different. That's why I covered Paralympics when no one else was. I'm about to go to my 8th Paralympics next year. Every single person, every single one of the 3,000 people at the Paralympic Games every 4 years is as interesting as John Jones. Every single one of them. Because they all have an amazing story. Because they're either disabled at birth or something's happened to them. They have fighting spirits. They're at the forefront of their own physicality. It's like, that's what I would encourage people to do. And you're saying that as well, which is be different. Find a story that's different. Find an angle that's different. Listen, I have to do the angles that everyone else does, which are mainstream media, where you get a call at 5 p.m. and they need 400 words and they need it in 25 minutes and you need to fucking write it and get it sent. Do you know what I mean? Because that's the news rhythm. But the stories that Nancy's talking about that she's plucked out. By the way, I'll show you in a minute, but look at that. I picked this out. This is cuttings from the old Telegraph library with my name on. They give you these when the library closed and it all went digital. All the stories that they actually cut out and put in these little cardboard containers. I've got a few of these.
You need to bind those or bind them. Put them in some sort of.
I will. I promise.
Yes.
I think the weird thing is lots of old practices work with modern stuff, which is the reason why I know Josh is saying that he wouldn't feel particularly comfortable doing that and hanging out with a particular team for a while, but you can learn about the whole industry by being there, and you can learn about how you operate and get people's trust, because that's really important. Unless you want to be someone who sits in an armchair away from an event and just pontificates or gives your opinion. I have this rule, which is, because I like to be in the face of fighters, my rule is I will only write what I will say to a fighter's face. And I've had arguments with Conor McGregor. Some fighters really fuck me off and piss me off. But what's the worst they can do? They're going to say no, they're not going to talk to me. So what? If I've got an opinion about them, I've got an opinion. I'm not a particularly, even though I'm quite an opinionated man, I'm not particularly opinionated about fighters because I love them and I really respect what they do, because I get it. You've got to put all those things to one side. The fear, the nerves, the fact, make your brain say, no, I'm going to go and get hurt. It's okay. Those are extraordinary things for human beings to do. They are acts of heroism. That's what people do during wartime. It's what people do, and they don't know they have it in them till they do it, you know? And we've all had those moments in our life, or we need to have them in our life, because it makes you grow as a human being. God, I'm such a hippie.
I love it.
Gareth, I know that you were inspired by fighters and by fighting, but when you decided to start writing about fighting, and even now, are there writers who just light you up? Like, you can always read a story by so-and-so and that'll just, that makes you want to go out and write something more?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think one of the most impressive writers that I read is a guy called Karim Zidane.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he does very good stuff. And I think what I like, he does different stuff.
Yeah.
I will read his stuff. As I say, I'm so busy doing output that I read aggregators of what news is going on, because I need to be on top of stuff for doing a lot of radio, because I don't just have my own radio show on a Saturday night in the UK. I'm called up by the station quite a lot, or I go on Al Jazeera, or I go on, the BBC or World Service. When there's a big story, I've been around a long time, so I'm asked to come in and do stories about a meta level.
Well, I'm sorry, but I meant, like, when you first decided you were going to start writing about fighting, was there a Norman Mailer or AJ Lee, like one of those guys? Oh my God, you can write about fighting in the way people write about, the way people write about high literature, or the way people write about war. Well, I don't think a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, no, I get that. No, I get that. No, I had to do a lot of reading at university, because I did a literature course in Spanish and Italian, and then I did a master's in linguistics and journalism. But I'm trying to think. I've read a lot of classical authors, really. I've read The Fight by Norman Mailer, and AJ Liebling's brilliant, and George Bernard Shaw was friends with boxers. Hemingway I love. And he loved a bullfight like he liked a fight with a marlin, like he liked with a fisherman, like he was a fan of fighting. I'm horribly self-taught. I'm so kinetic and probably ADHD, and didn't realize it till my 50s myself, that I find it I haven't read a book from cover to cover probably for 15 years. I've not got the patience to sit still for long enough, And Nancy, I said to Nancy, I don't consider myself a great writer at all, or a good writer even. I just like storytelling. Sometimes I have a story. I'm as proud of a 700-word story I've written as a column in the Telegraph sometimes, that I've got to get written in 30 minutes about Donald Trump or Mike Tyson, as I am, a big 3,000-word magazine piece for Fighters Only that I've spent 2.5 days on, on the Diaz brothers or whatever, because I always wish I had another day on a story, or another hour, or another, because it's just about, I don't know, I don't rate myself as a writer, really. I think I'm a better broadcaster, so, and that's just the way I feel. I'm not particularly confident about my own writing,
Says every good writer. I know. And yes, no, you have to have some sort of, you know, self-hate with writing.
But can I just say, just to finish off that answer to Josh, that there are brilliant writers on fight sports. There are brilliant writers on cricket as well, by the way, which is I have a big library. I wanted to be a professional cricketer when I was growing up. It's like wanting to be a professional, I was a pitcher in cricket, you know, I could swing the ball and things. There are some great writings on cricket as well. There's a guy called Neville Cardus, and I think I like the sayings of writers rather than the complete tomes of reading like Neville Cardus. I'll never forget this line where he wrote that a great fact is worth 1,000 opinions. And I get that so much. And there's another one. There's Samuel Johnson, who 100 years ago was one of the great essayists and writers and playwrights and journalists, who said, when you're writing, research meticulously, simplify, then exaggerate. And for me, that's the perfect template for writing a great story, you know?
Yeah, no, Josh,
No?
do you have anything to add?
No, I like that quote. I never heard that Samuel Johnson quote before. It's really good.
Samuel Johnson is he's not a fight writer. Samuel Johnson was one of our foremost journalists 100 years ago, an essayist, a playwright, a novelist, a satirist. But he clearly was able, the point is, when you're writing, sometimes I'm writing to fill a space, to tell a bit of news, but if you're writing for pleasure, and that's where I would answer your question that you asked just now, if I can see that someone's put a lot into a story that they're writing, I'm very happy to read it. When they've played with the turn of a phrase or played with what they're writing about, not trying to be clever. I don't like writers who are too clever. I don't like the Martin Amises of this world, who are very self-indulgent. You know, I like people are just economical, but just have played within a certain space. Then I love that. I mean, of course, you know, and I think everyone has that sometimes. You know, you have that day when your column just fucking zips through and you're done. Do you know what I mean?
That's
you know,
the best thing in the world.
There's a guy called Shane Crookton, who I sat down, one of my favorite interviews. He's a featherweight in Bellator, but he used to be a heavyweight, right? Get that to start with, yeah? He lost 100 pounds. Get this, Josh. Get this. Atticus, go and interview this guy at some point. Shane Crookton is an ex-Marine, right? He had PTSD after serving in Iraq or Afghanistan, probably Iraq. Came back, joined a motorbike gang, was an alcoholic, decided he was going to kill himself. He was about 27 at the time, I think 26. And I was sitting with him and he's telling me all of this one day. I thought, one of the Bellator PR guys, I was at an event, said, go and have a chat to Shane. I think he's quite interesting. I'm like 10 minutes in, I'm like, this is a fucking movie. Like, he becomes an alcoholic. He's in this biker gang. He decides he's so depressed from his PTSD that I think someone got blown up next to him and he got, you know, he was discharged because he really wasn't well. And he decides he's going to kill himself. So he takes the $700 he's got and he buys drugs from this dealer on the corner of the street. He's going to take all, whatever it is, the heroin, the coke, take it all together and he's going to kill himself. So he goes home. And as he's about to take the drugs, this guy bursts into his apartment, his flat. And it's the guy that sold him the drugs, but it was an undercover cop. So he got busted. He got his life saved by the guy busting him because he didn't have time to take the drugs. And he went, you know, he went to court. He went to prison for a while. He came out and he'd been fighting at 250 pounds in back of bars as an MMA fighter. Then he lost 100 pounds and became a pro fighter at featherweight, had a couple of kids, and he leaves, Josh wants to write this story now, he leaves his phone number, his cell number on all his social media so that any fucking vet who's ever depressed can call him whenever they want. For me, that's a fucking amazing story. He'll never be a world champion, but that guy is an amazing inspiration. Those are the stories that write themselves.
Yeah.
That's the story I can tell you without even looking at any notes, because I will never forget that guy. And when I see him, I fucking hug him. Do you know what I mean? And that, for me, is what the industry we're in, inspiring people. Those are the people that make a difference. That's why I do it.
I love it. That's Shane Crockton.
Listen, stop taking notes, Nancy. Let's go to the next one.
I know. I'm doing this for Atticus, you know. But no, I completely, you know, Joan Didion. I don't know what you.
I love Joan Didion. I listen, I'd have dated her if I'd been 30 years older.
So would I. And
She's
yeah, that's
so
why
gorgeous.
I know. She's amazing. And her quote.
What's it? Crawling towards Bethlehem. What's it called? Slouching towards Bethlehem.
Yes.
Well, she was around all the druggies. I've read that, Josh, about her documenting the druggies in the Summer of Love. You know.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And she's one of those writers who writes beautifully with there's nothing clever about her.
No.
I'm just going to put some more tequila in my glass, by the way. So.
Please. You know, we're a little early still in the States, but we'll join you soon.
I'm on holiday, remember, Nancy. I'm doing this on my flipping holiday.
You're on holiday, and to be, you know, my goodness. We are on the last day of shelter and stay, so here in DC. So
what we call lockdown, yeah.
But when I bring up Joan Didion because she did that. She went and what she did was observe too, and observe with no judgment. You know, and just, you know, I think she just, you know, tried to get stories from people. And
well, again, that is the same story that I talk about going to that gym in Albuquerque, because she's documenting, and I have read, I mean, like if I had been there, like I really, really understand when when you read people like Joan, you understand why they were there. It was amazing reportage. But it's a cultural war she's reporting on, you know. So she's on the front line, and there's something about her in her energy that you can tell people trusted her to be in their apartment while they're all taking drugs with the kids running around. And, you know, and like, I relate to that shit. That's what I relate to. That, like, it's real life. It's real life. So, and that I think is what we see in our industry. We see a lot of real life. Like when someone's been beaten up and you see them in their dressing room afterwards and their soul is destroyed, you know, they're going to have to go away and grieve and recover from the loss and the beating. They actually take a beating. They actually, by the way, take a fucking physical beating, and it takes some coming back from. And people don't think about that. Do you know what I mean? They piss blood. They fucking hurt. They cry. They grieve. They go into the arms of their loved one. They can't have sex for days. They can't. They're curled up in a little ball. Things happen. It's putting yourself in the fucking firing line, and that's where it's important that we have the empathy for those things. You know, they're not superhuman. They're not superhuman. They are like us, flesh and blood.
It's that's fascinating.
But sorry,
you know,
Joan Didion,
Joan Didion. We tell ourselves stories to live. I always think about that quote because I think it means so much in that why it connects readers with that empathy. You know, that it helps us get through life knowing these stories too. It's a back and forth relationship between the reader and the subject and the author. And I think about, you're saying if I fail, I get a bad review from my department or a boss, you know, I'm not naked or, you know, in my underwear being pummeled, literally taking a beating.
I'd love to watch that though. You in your underwear being pummeled by your daughter right now. That would be quite fun. You know, it would be a nice interlude. Yeah,
it would be as fun as you can get. But that, and I don't think that we think about that. And because, you know, it is entertainment and we want to feel that it's a show and we want to have that distance, you know, but I think, you know, when I was telling you, Gareth, that I wish you could be at some of these early UFC boxing fights in person. And I know that because I don't know about other viewers, but I want to see how the fighters are going, because they've also been enduring the stress of this pandemic, and they've been having to do it with also kids and all of that. And so I really hope that those stories would help me live.
Well, I spoke to Phil Davis the other day. I haven't put the video out yet. I put the story out. I did it on Zoom. And Phil was talking about, it's very interesting. It's one of the interesting aspects of all of this, because we all have to navigate our own route back into normalcy and being around people again and being at events and so on. And Phil's got little kids, and he said, you know, I'm a real gym hopper when I'm training for a fight. Phil Davis, everyone knows who Phil Davis is, obviously, yeah. You know, and you know, he is an elite level fighter. He's been a Bellator light heavyweight champion. You look at his resume in the UFC, he's top level. He's got the broadest shoulders I've ever seen on a man. He looks like an Olympic swimmer. He's a beautiful man, actually, a beautiful human being. And I spoke to Phil the other day, and he's got little kids. And he was saying, I really have to make decisions about how I train in different gyms now, whether I go out, do I quarantine after my fight for 2 weeks before I come home as well to see my children? They're really serious questions I have to ask of myself. Yet he's burning to fight, because as we know, all these fighters, they're driven to do it till they can't do it anymore. I think it's really, really interesting, you know, what's happened.
Yeah, no, and I, you know, so that's, for me, I don't want, because I think a lot of people, we're also feeling this urge to normalcy. And I think that a lot of people I want it packaged the same way. I want to turn it on Saturday night and be transported to a different life. But for me, I would feel a falseness. I would not connect. So, you know, I'm going to be glad to see the corners wearing masks. And because for me, I don't know about what you guys have. I know, Josh, we've talked about the COVID return of combat sports. But it is interesting to think about what the reporter journalists and, you know, what you know.
Well, you've got to take it on an individual basis. Like, I'm diabetic and I've had heart procedures. You know, I had a heart attack last year, so I've had a heart procedure. So I probably at events to begin with. I mean, I went to Harley Street, which is where most of our medical doctors are, in central London a couple of days ago, and I'm COVID negative, which I'm happy about.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good. But I think we all have to make our own decisions, like Phil Davis was saying. We all have to make our own decisions on, you know, I would quite like a face shield at my first few events. We're looking at having events, boxing events in the UK in July, much as I think Bellator are looking to come back in the CBS lot in mid-July for 5 to 6 events. So the UFC are kicking up again this weekend, and then 250 next weekend. Bob Arum's starting in June. Like Nevada have opened that up, and they're looking like a week of tests for fighters. So we're a bit more homogenous over here because we've got one government. We've still got no sparring, by the way. Sparring's not allowed.
Oh, it's not allowed yet.
Well, I spoke to the boxing board today, and they said, no, they have not allowed sparring yet, even though the government have said sparring's okay, but it's down to the governing bodies of each sport, which is like our state commission. But we have a national commission called the British Boxing Board of Control, who are not sure yet whether it's the right time to start sparring until they issue the exact guidelines for how equipment needs to be cleaned in gyms. It's just so complex.
Yeah, it is.
And I think, you know, I mean, I would not have been comfortable going to that May event in Florida. No, I don't think so. On a personal level, you know, I don't know whether the guys would have gone. You know, would you have gone?
Josh, would you have gone? We can't hear you.
I got to stop pressing the mute button. You know what? I'm a little gun shy because last time you guys made fun of me for having the birds chirping in the background.
Indoors, you're fine, Josh.
He only
Yeah,
puts
so-
himself on mute, so I can't hear him snoring while I'm talking.
Exactly. I've gotten very good at sleeping with my eyes open. Yeah, Nancy and I have talked about this a lot, and I've been ambivalent, leaning toward negative about the UFC doing what the UFC's been doing. But again, like not because I don't want to see fights. I mean, nothing makes, you know, I've been against it, but have watched every single fight. I mean, you know, I'm perfectly comfortable with that hypocrisy. But I don't like, for me, the issue, what it does is that it brings into even bolder relief things that have always bothered me about this sport. I mean, like, you've been covering fighting forever. So as you know, in order to cover boxing and in order to cover MMA, you've got to tuck away some moral qualms and you've got to tuck away some ethical problems. Because I mean, if you give voice to all of them, like, just don't be into fighting. I mean, you can't, you know, both in terms of, I mean, it's hard to justify fighting morally on its own, but then you bring in the promoters and all, you know, I mean, it's
the wild west of business, isn't it? It's a wild west. It still is.
It's totally the wild west,
Yeah.
and a very all murky gray areas morally.
Like step aside money for someone not to have a fight. Like, how ludicrous! Imagine that in business. Here's a couple of million not to have a business deal. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like it is the wild west. But sorry.
Yeah.
No problem at all. I totally agree with you. But this COVID stuff has really brought into bold relief the stuff that has always really bothered me about the UFC. And you were talking about how fighters they've got it in their blood to fight and they want to be fighting. And that's totally true. But the problem is that it feels like it's just like really seeing the disparity in the power between the UFC as a promotion and the fighters who have to fight. They have no money coming in. Dana White can talk all he wants about how there's no punishment for a fighter who says that they don't want to fight during COVID. But we all know, anyone who's covered the sport knows that there are plenty of fighters who've been punished for a lot less at the whims of Dana White. So it's been a little bit maddening to watch the sport come back so quickly for that reason. And then there's the other issue that, like, you know, we are longtime MMA fans, and like, this is kind of the one thing this is the first time MMA has been mainstream, that's sort of gotten mainstream attention in a long time. And it kind of feels like it's getting mainstream attention for all the wrong reasons. So it, like, once again, you sort of feel like you're on the back foot and put in a position of defending this sport that you love more than anything, but it's always been kind of indefensible. So the long answer is, I don't know how I feel about it. It's one more thing for me to feel ambivalent about. I just know that it hasn't endeared Dana White and the UFC to me any more than they were before, which was pretty minimal.
Well, can I answer, Nancy?
Yes, please.
Well, I was the same. I mean, on my radio shows, in my reporting on it, I was very neutral. My reporting, because weirdly, for the Telegraph, I didn't really opinionate too much, other than one column where I laid out the facts in the Neville Carter style that I was talking about earlier, rather than giving my opinions on it, because they were fully entitled to do it. And in some ways, it gave a little bit of a kickstart to everyone else to get moving. I was very nervous about them coming back so soon. I didn't like the length of testing times beforehand. I thought things hadn't played out enough and there hadn't been enough discussion. But I also felt that and Ariel Helwani and I had a chat about this. They had an opportunity to sit with the rest of the mainstream for the first time in their lives. But instead they chose to be the outlaws again, or the scruffy cousins that they once were, which they aren't anymore. They could have just sat with the rest of the mainstream, but that desire they have to be the best, to be different, to be viral, kind of forced them to go and do it. But I think there are economic factors as well.
Sure.
The lunacy of doing April the 19th, and I would have been there, April the 18th, April the 19th, well, no, it was originally April the 19th, wasn't it, in New York, because I was going to be there.
Then they just switched it to Tachi Palace.
To Tachi Palace. I was so pleased that the higher level executives at Disney came in and made a decision about that.
Yeah.
I think they did a pretty good job of those 3 events in the end. But you know what I felt when, and it was great to watch an event after nothing for 7 weeks. But my feeling at the time when I watched it that night, and I did report on it and so on, was, oh my God, there's so many bigger things going on in the world than a fight event right now. That was my genuine feeling at the time. You know, at the time, thousands of people a day were dying in this country. And, you know, like you say, the aficionados of the sport were screaming for an event and so delighted. And it was great to see it. And it was interesting, the parameters of, you know, the coaches in the corners sounding louder than the commentary teams. And, you know, all of those kind of things were interesting. But I just felt that they've put themselves in a position, or the UFC have put themselves in a position where they've got to be the first to do this. They've got to be the outlaws, you know, whereas there's a gentler approach from Bellator. There's a gentler approach, you know, from the Boxing Board of Control over here. Bob Arum was more patient. I mean, he's as go-get as Dana White, by the way, Bob Arum. I've known him a very long time. And and he knows shit about boxing, you know? So, I mean, he's only been doing it 60 years. So, like, I think that was my big thing, Josh, Atticus, Nancy, that there was this bigger entity going on than a fight event on a Saturday night. Like, we live in a tiny microcosm in our world. 2% of people are interested in the world are interested in fight sports. You know that, don't you? Less than 2%. And that's for the big fuckers, the big fights. Yeah? There's a tiny, tiny percentage of the world that follow fights all the time. So there's our niche is kind of insignificant in the global story that's going on right now. And that's how I was seeing it at the time.
Well, Garrett, do you think, though, it looks like, I think Dana White even knocked on wood after he got through those 3 events. They're putting one on tomorrow. Do you think that being the first, and it looks like they rolled the dice and...
I know it worked. It was great. I'd like to know what... We haven't heard anything from Jacare. Where's the journalism on that, by the way?
Yeah.
And I'm too lazy to do it right now, and I'm on an 8 days off. But, you know, Atticus, Jacare, is it Ali Abdelaziz who does...
Is it his manager?
I'm not sure. It might be.
Yeah.
But there you go. There's a story for you, Atticus. Get
Yeah.
moving. Chase Jacare and how he is and his 2 cornermen are. No one's done that story. I don't remember seeing that story, you know? So
I completely agree. I'm just curious. I think I'm not totally feeling like UFC's out of the woods in terms of anything potentially happening, but they're like 2 weeks now, or over 2. Is this going to be 3 weeks? I can't remember how far away. But do you think that in the course of history, it will have...
It was the 9th of May, Nancy. It was the 9th of May. So it
but
was 20 days ago.
That one, yes. And then they had the 13th and the 16th.
Yeah.
So thank you. Good job on your math there, Gareth.
Still got it, baby. Still got it.
Do you think that it has given them an edge in terms of grabbing more than 2%? Because I'll tell you, Gareth, you know, there was a time when boxing was a global sport in terms of everyone tuning in to Dempsey versus tuning to via their radio. And boxing was the global sport at that time. And being the heavyweight champion meant you were the biggest sports person in the world. I don't know if Dana White I don't think he was going for that. But I do think there was either something that he wanted to be first or he wanted MMA to be first.
Well, I'm not a pussy. I'll tell you that, right? I just want to make that clear. I'm not a media pussy, you know, I'm not. And you know, had I been nearby, I probably would have gone. Because I probably wouldn't be able to stop myself, but I'd have had to get a visor and all that stuff. But I think it just wasn't like it wasn't even fucking Ferguson against Khabib. It was a great fight. I mean, I'm trying to get hold of Justin at the moment. I bought him lunch about Oh no, it was dinner. I think it was either lunch or dinner. It cost me $90. So I said, I'll pay for your lunch, Justin Gaethje, at New York, the last time I saw him. Sat down next to the bar, and it cost me a cool $90.
New York. New York. He owes
New York,
you.
New York. No, he just owes me an interview. But no, but it's like they didn't do themselves any harm. They didn't do themselves any damage. I think they did good numbers. I think 700,000 odd pay-per-view buys. So they did well with it, but it didn't. It didn't, like, Francis Ngannou did what Francis Ngannou does. Henry Cejudo retired and it went bloop. You know, the fight between, you know, Ferguson and Gaethje was fun. It was nice to see an event back. But it wasn't huge. It was just a fight event. That's all it was. It was just a fight event, you know. It didn't change the world, you know.
I agree. For me, I would have preferred to have been a little bit, you know, more cautious and had these same fights, because I think it would have garnered the same, because I think that whole idea that we're going to grab people who are so desperate for content, you know, and there are people who are watching like Korean baseball now. And I think German.
Yeah, we've got the Bundesliga here. They're all watching Bundesliga football every Saturday here. And that's been fun. I mean, I'm not into soccer, but, you know, it's been fun. But we're coming back. Middle of June, football is coming back here, by the way, soccer.
We'll see. But you know what? I think that my husband is a baseball fan. He's watching Korean baseball. He also, like, Premier League. He loves soccer. So he's watching German soccer when he never does. I don't think it really brought any new casual fan or even just a new person into comedy.
No, all it showed is that as people, like, the toughest thing I've found over the last 10 weeks is being home alone and not, you know, just not being with anyone. We've all been faced with different
Struggles.
Challenges. Challenges. And like, there is a groove about, like, I'm used to 15 times a year or 30 times a year I'm at events. 15 times a year I have a day, I do a radio show on Saturday night, or I go to an event here, then I come back and I'm home at midnight and I think, oh, I'll get an hour's sleep, or I don't. So, and I have a few coffees and I'm watching an event till 5 in the morning, and I'm doing a story, then I go to sleep, and then I wake up in the afternoon on Sunday. But I think quite what this has to do with a university lecturer, I don't know. But but basically that it's just our levels of normalcy. People love to watch their thing on a Saturday, go shopping with their wife and their children, and then they go to the football in the afternoon. And we're just learning that we're kind of overprivileged and oversaturated with by sensuality all the time, you know, and privilege. And to get back to the original reason for the lecture, which is about writing and fighting, is that basically the reason why I use that mechanism with the Nick Diaz or the Nate Diaz story of not interviewing Nate Diaz in the end, even though he came and choked me out a couple of months later at the forum and said, "You didn't find me. We're going to have to do this interview." The story that you've read is that whatever situation you're in, you can always turn it into a story, because the bag lady in the bus queue is a story. The person that talks to you in the line in the bank is a story, because you just need to have the radar up, because stories are everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So the story of fighting not happening, I've written so many news stories about fighting not happening during the pandemic and how it comes back. So if the arc is just having your radar, really, because there's stories everywhere, you know.
I have to ask you, I remember watching a video you made, Gareth, for the DAZN.
What earlier on in my porn career? You've been watching that as well, have you? Okay.
That will be in the next lecture. No, this was, you had made it for
After Hours.
After hours, yeah.
Opposite.
Writing, fighting, ... and then what came next.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God. And if you only knew like what a big dork I am. So no, so Gareth, I was watching YouTube and it was the night of DAZN, and when they had the YouTube people, I don't know if it was the Jake Paul or the
Oh, that night was brilliant. Yeah.
yeah, because
Billy Joe Saunders, Devin Haney, Jake Paul, and who was it? KSI and
because what I found what
Jake
you did,
Paul.
because you took the camera through the crowd, and I was
Oh,
just
yeah, it was
like,
great fun.
that is what the story really is too.
Yeah, well, that night I'll tell you, I was taken for that story. William Hill, I'm an ambassador. I'm one of their fight ambassadors. I'm their fight correspondent for William Hill, the betting agent. It's one of the things I do. I present for them on big fight nights, and I go and interview people over here and ask for predictions, and I, have fun with the ring card girls. And it's a bit of a show. It's a show before I do the radio or before I do my writing. Sometimes I do all three on the night, just to fucking make myself go insane, because I shouldn't really be able to do all three, but it's a bit of fun. But that night, the KSI Logan Paul was KSI Logan Paul. It was. That was an interesting night because they had those guys as the headliner with two brilliant. Billy Joe Saunders and Devin Haney are two brilliant boxers, and yet we had two YouTubers turning pro, fighting at the head of the card. And in front of me was Justin Bieber and Little K. And Little K, is it little?
It's Atticus, is it Little K? I don't know.
Little Steve.
That is like 5 years below me. Like
Okay. Well, like every famous YouTuber, every famous pop star,
influencer,
all of them. And like it was just really interesting. I found it fascinating because it opened a new world for me, because those guys are the mainstream. I work in the mainstream, but those guys really are the mainstream, for 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds. And I thought it was fascinating. And that really was the story that night. Yeah. And a lot of purists from boxing were going, oh, what are you doing there covering that? Well, I stayed in the biggest mansion I've ever stayed in my life in LA, which was fun for a week. We had an amazing time around all these new people. There's these YouTubers. They're not YouTubers. They are modern media stars, is what they are. Modern social media stars. The UK involved as well, and I just thought it was fascinating. And to be honest, it was like a fight in a school playground. And I don't know if you guys saw it, but KSI and Logan Paul gave their all. They really did, and it was actually quite exciting seeing Bieber out of his seat every 5 seconds, and it was just fun.
Well, and I think that sometimes it's a story around the fight. We talk about the story of the fighter, but there was something going on there, and that was what I was compelled by, because I know, yes, I think especially the other one, the Logan Paul one, that was even a sadder fight, I think. Yes, you're not getting high quality boxing, but there's interest, and there was great cards up until, I don't know about the second one, but having, those other ones on the card. And, this thing is, though, we got to grow the support of boxing. So I don't know necessarily if being a traditionalist and sticking to the system is always the best.
No, listen, in history, it's always happened. There's a great story about Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion in the world, coming on a tour of Europe. I think it might have been when he was being chased by the authorities for crossing the border with a white girl and marrying her, the Mann Act that changed it all, of course. And well done, Donald Trump. Was it a posthumous pardon by? It's one of the few good things that he has done.
I can't say he didn't do that. That's true.
Yeah. So without let's not get into that.
Yeah.
But I've got my dump on Trump toilet paper at the moment in my cloakroom on the inside of, just as you come into my house. Actually, everyone's allowed to dump on Trump because he's on the toilet paper. But there's a story of Jack Johnson. I think a man called Craven had gone to France for a competition. This was, I think we're talking 1920 probably. I may be slightly off with the date. But Jack Johnson came on a fighting tour of Europe. Yeah, and he arrived in this beautiful looking man, this, you know, big man, beautiful skin he had. He was a very chocolate coloured, he was beautiful looking. Obviously he had his own style. And he arrived in a three-piece suit and a hat, and he was mobbed on the quayside when he came here, and he was vaunted everywhere he went. And he went off to, I think I'm right in saying he said he'd fight the light heavyweight champion of Europe in a bull ring in Spain. Now, this guy called Craven had turned up to win the light heavyweight championship. He wasn't a boxer, he was a writer. And he was related to
Oscar Wilde.
To Oscar Wilde, yes. It was Arthur Craven, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you know this story. It's an amazing
It's a great
story.
It's fantastic.
And it's like Logan Paul and KSI, frankly. There's always been the circus. So they set this fight up, but he turned up and became the light heavyweight or heavyweight champion of Europe. But he was the only person to turn up for the tournament. So he was crowned champion. And he didn't even have a fight. So the only one to turn up for the tournament, Arthur Craven. I think it was Arthur Craven. It's definitely Craven. So he's crowned. He took the championship himself as light heavyweight champion of Europe. And then they said, well, we're going to put you in an exhibition bout now with Jack Johnson. So a huge crowd turned up at a new bull ring built in Madrid or Barcelona. I think it was Madrid. And thousands of people were there to see the first black heavyweight champion of the world fight Arthur Craven. Well, of course, he took one look at Jack Johnson, you know, and apparently he curled up like an embryo for a few rounds. Yeah. And like he fell on the ground when he was breathed on. I think he fell to the ground 7 times. And of course there was a riot and the police were called, and I think Jack Johnson hit him a couple of times because he was just getting annoyed. But you've always had these kind of peculiar sideshows. I mean, there literally was a riot. People wanted their money back, and it's amazing that you think that this guy who thought he could fight, because remember, people like Norman Mailer and some of the British writers at the time, and I do it sometimes. I have little fights with other journos. What you do, you get drawn into it all. And this guy thought he could step in, and the reality was he couldn't handle. He was a writer, for goodness sake. Yeah. I mean, have I missed anything out of that story, Josh?
Yes, you have to comment.
No. I think you told it brilliantly. Yeah, it was totally fascinating stuff. I mean, that Arthur Craven stuff. I love that in particular that he got the championship title, that he got the title simply because he was the only guy who showed up for the tournament. It's really brilliant. The only thing I take issue with is like it's almost more remarkable. It would be like Logan Paul showing up and
against Tyson
fighting
Fury.
Like Mike Tyson, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to stand in the ring against someone like Jack Johnson must be terrifying.
Exactly.
But it was a writer who had the gumption, or just the complete.
No, he was a fucking narcissist, and when he got there, he couldn't fucking do it. He should have taken his licks, and he couldn't. You know.
Oh my God, no. It's good to remember, because I think we always think this idea that history, we're always evolving, things are getting better, but no, we're continuously we're thinking. So next week, Gareth, we're going to do a special panel because June 3rd is the 4th anniversary of Muhammad Ali, and so teaming up with Tanisha Singleton, another professor, and so please come. I've already told Atticus and Josh, but how interesting it's happening at this point in history with what's going on in the U.S. with racial relations, and Tanisha, like, this is unbelievable. How can we not look back at what Muhammad Ali did as someone in sports, and not reflect on that, and reflect on what happens in history. I think we think, oh, back then in the 60s was a different time, and what happened to Jack Johnson in terms of being incarcerated with the Mann Act, well, what happened with Ali and being incarcerated for, so it's interesting how I think that we continuously need to know that history does repeat itself, whether it's something like that or even just a circus show, and not think that we've evolved.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why we're able to be intellectuals in fight sports. It's a bit like I mentioned cricket earlier. We've been playing cricket against the colonies. The British once ruled 2/3 of the world, remember? So cricket was part of muscular Christianity. And, to India, I use muscular Christianity as an academic term there, that, the sense that they thought they were doing civilizing things. Cricket was one of those things. So, the England have played cricket against Australia, the old enemy, for a very, very long time, 160 odd years. And it's a very important thing. And it's fight sports. There've been political incidents about, imagine if a baseball pitcher decided in one series, because the batsman was so good, that he would decide just to target the neck and the chest of the fighter and the head of the batter. I have that in my mentality as well. Hit him in the head with the ball instead, and he'll think about it a little bit better then. And we had a whole series like that. There was prime ministers and diplomatic incidents where there was a guy called Sir Donald Bradman, who was so brilliant that he would just, like the equivalent of baseball, would just hit home runs every time he went out to bat. And this is 1931, 32, if I'm correct. I may be wrong there. But it was called Bodyline, the series they played. And they played for 30 days against each other over a summer.
Wow.
6 matches of 5 days. Because test match cricket is, one game is played over 5 days, 8 hours a day, yeah? So, and the prime ministers were involved. But if you take it back to boxing, the reflective struggle to have heavyweight champions of the world, from Jack Johnson, Joe Louis, Floyd Patterson, Sonny Liston, Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, on Deontay Wilder, that you have to realize, and this is why I often appreciate when Deontay Wilder talks about being a leader as a black man, that there is a route for the immigrant communities. There's a route for suppression and slavery and escape from slavery, in the power of this human being who represents the toughest big guy on the planet. And so I think it's a very deep thing, and it's something that I really enjoy writing about and really enjoy reading about. If there's something I do enjoy reading about, Josh, it's that sociological and historical element that we have in boxing. We don't really have it in MMA as much, but boxing's very rich for that very reason. The Poles, the Italians, the Jews, the African Americans, or black as we call them here, it runs in our country as it runs in America. And it's a very powerful strain of individual that gives hope to so many other people and gives them identity, and has given people an identity at different times and different eras. I think that's fair to say, And I do think it's a brilliant thing to read about, to refer back to. I always get teased on my radio show because I like to go back in history when we talk about our favorite fights every week. And I do like to go back to those things. Schmeling against Joe Louis, for example, Schmeling Louis 2, like that is the beginning of the attack from the West against National Socialism, the Nazis in Germany, where Roosevelt, I think it was Roosevelt, it would have been Roosevelt and Hitler, gave messages to the two fighters before they fought. I mean, how extraordinary is that? That was the biggest fucking COVID going on right then, And yet the two heavyweight boxers about to meet were given the blessings of their leaders, So that's how deep our sport is, sociologically.
Yeah. No, and I watched a cricket movie, Lagoon, that was 4 hours. I don't know if it was about that body line, but cricket does have its place in history.
Don't be a lightweight, Nancy. It's a very, very deep sport.
Yeah, we don't have cricket in writing at American University yet.
Oh,
but
I'm not joking. Some of the writing on it is because it's a very it's a very technical game, but it's very mental. It's so mental. It's very. I mean, I've watched that documentary recently with. I've never been a basketball fan. Never really taken any interest. But what I enjoyed about The Last Dance was I get it with Jordan. I get it. I get the attitude, and I want to be on his fucking team. And but because I feel like that when I play team sports, and my guys I played with back me up on this. If you're turning up on a Saturday, even if it's an amateur sport, and 3 out of the 11 aren't 100% on or 150%, fuck off home now. I'd rather have 8 than 11. Do you know what I mean? And that's Michael Jordan to a T. If you're here, you give everything. And I loved how he was switched on ahead of his time. And that documentary for me just makes him one of the greatest of all time. And him sitting there laughing at himself, looking back, I think was extraordinary. I don't know whether you guys have watched it and enjoyed it, but he is amazing, mentally amazing.
No, I was captivated. I don't know. Josh, did you watch it?
I did. I was completely fascinated by it. I'm not sure I've ever seen a more competitive human being in my life. I mean, I always knew he was competitive. I had heard the stories, but watching him 25 years later, looking at video footage of other guys he'd played against being interviewed for the documentary and just laughing. And when he said it, at one point, he said, why was it so important for you to beat Clyde Drexler? And he said, I liked Clyde Drexler. He was a great basketball player. It offended me that people were talking about him in the same sentence as me, and I had to crush him as a result. And I'm sitting there thinking, that is a remark, because it's not like Clyde Drexler ever said he was as good as Michael Jordan. It was the fact that other people spoke about him in the same sentence meant that he had to crush Clyde Drexler. I agree. That was a 9-hour, 10-hour study in a very particular kind of mind.
But he could. But Josh, the perfect mindset for a fighter.
Oh, that's why he's arguably the greatest athlete ever. There's no doubt about it. But you could just see he can't. To this day, he can't turn it off. It's just you can't cultivate that. That's either in you or it's not. It's clearly the strain that dominates his brain.
What I loved about him was like, and I've been privileged in my life to be around greatness at times where people have that moment in the light where they cannot be touched. They cannot be touched. And he was the perfect blend of amazing ability, but kind of a totally unshakable self-belief. Totally impermeable. And it's what made him so compelling. What I missed from the documentary, and what I thought it was missing, I wanted to see him not with his mum and dad who loved him and adored him. I wanted to see more of his children and his wife. Yeah. Because I wanted to see what he was like when he was soft. Because we would have had a soft edge around them as well. Do you know what I mean? I loved him. I wanted to play with him. I wanted to fucking be, because like he was the captain without anyone saying he was the captain. Do you know what I mean? Right. It was amazing. Yeah. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I can't believe like when, for me it was because I was younger when like the bad boys, the Pistons, they went out and stumped him like the Jordan rules, right?
Mm-hmm. The Jordan rules,
rules could beat so many people. You think of the fighter who's being brought up, and then I think about this with Ngannou, right? And just gets stumped. They did like Stipe did the Jordan rules. And like just took him down, and it defeated him for a while. Now I can't wait to see if Ngannou.
No, he's very limited, Nancy. Fucking be honest. Come on.
I agree. I don't think he's learned enough. He hasn't learned anything.
When he's got that much, look, he will be UFC heavyweight champion of the world at some point. There's no question. Yeah, but he's very limited.
Atticus, what do you think?
We've seen nothing new from him.
Oh,
I agree.
Like he's crazy athletic, but like we have seen literally nothing he did not show on his run to the title, either mentally or physically. Like
Great.
he's had like 2.5 minutes in the cage since the Derek Lewis fight across 4 fights, and we have learned nothing.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a blessing and a curse to be that strong and to have
Yeah.
that kind of knockout power. Because why get better?
Exactly. But do you not agree, Josh, that he will be champion at some point? The biggest legacy that Francis will leave, and he's a beautiful man, another beautiful human being, to be
Yeah.
honest,
I agree.
is that, and we have a lot of beautiful men and women in our sport, is that he will create an amazing legacy for African fighters. That is the biggest thing that
Yeah.
you know.
I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, there's just like an influx. All of a sudden, it was Ngannou and it was Israel Adesanya and Kamaru Usman. It was like the snap of the fingers, and suddenly there was just a legacy for African fighters. Suddenly that entire continent seemed to just like come to life in relation to MMA. It seemed to happen almost out of nowhere.
The last 5 years have been, I think, the rise of the Eastern European fighters, and I think the next 5 years, or maybe even the next decade, will be the Africans.
Yeah.
I really
think
do
so,
think
yeah.
it will be the Africans, because there's genuine poverty there, and people will be able to find their way out of poverty, because there's a lot of very, very tough people, and there's kind of people who are like 6'3" featherweights. I think we'll find those kind of, like, we'll have these extraordinary physiques. Like the Fulani are very tall, very narrow people, like the Adesanya build. You know, in Uganda, you've got very square-jawed men and women who are very powerful. I've done a lot of traveling in Africa, and the physiques of people, some of them are made for MMA. You know, I think we'll see a lot of them coming through. A lot of them.
Yeah, I know. It's exciting. And as you said, though, the extreme poverty, I think Ngannou was he someone who was a miner, a sand mine or something?
He was digging. No, he was digging in the mine from the age of 11, I think it was. You know.
But to bring it back to I have a shirt that says 209. You know, as you say, that's Stockton. You know.
Did you make that T-shirt, Nancy?
No, I am.
Did your daughter make that 10 minutes ago?
Not that skilled. No, I bought this. It's a Reebok. So I'm
All
getting.
right, okay.
But
it's very naive art on there, isn't it? Very naive. Yeah.
You know, well, who knows? They're trying to embody Stockton, which is, you know, unfortunately, one of our country's, you know, most.
My favorite town. Don't knock it. It's one of my favorite towns.
You know, all I'm saying is it does breed a fighter mentality. When you go back and you see what you have to struggle with there, and you know, I don't believe, you know, they started fighting when they were 14 and 16, the Diaz brothers, you know, and it just, that's their way out, or their way into another prison, and you know, as we circle back, you know, I know we're already like an hour and 40 minutes, just whizzed by. Atticus, sitting there in Oregon, I'd love to know, because that was such a great insight on Ngannou. Any thoughts that have come up for you?
What have you learned? What have you learned today?
I think this is like, this along with a lot of the other journalists who have come on, not like media people who like sit in the like press conference thing and raise their hand, but like people who actually like write compelling things. I think that it's just showing like, oh, you have to do something unique. And like, this has driven that home. And it's not like you have to go out and find it, and you might not find it, and it might kind of fuck you over, but you have to like take that risk.
Well, thanks a lot. That doesn't sound very complimentary towards Josh and I, but never mind, that we're fairly fucked over. But clearly Nancy is. But the thing is, what you just said, the point you just made is, it won't fuck you over, because if you make that extra phone call, if you drive that extra mile, if you spend that extra hour, the story is right there in front of you. You can talk about waiting the 5 hours to get the interview, and like the police tapped on your door and said move. The things that happened, someone threatened you to move, and John Jones came out and said, don't touch this guy, he's come to interview me. It's all the story. Do you know what I mean? The story's there. It doesn't matter that you don't get the thing. I think that's the point Nancy was making about my Nate Diaz story. He came and choked me out, as I say, in the forum afterwards and said, I heard you on the radio with Ariel talking about it. I've read the story. Brah, I got to find you. I'll find you the, I got to the Nick Diaz Academy, right, in Stockton. I went around the corner. I got a coffee and they said, oh, one of the Gracies who's training with them, AJ Agazarm, who's a lovely kid, the Florida boy. One of the Gracies, is it?
Caesar Gracie?
Which
That's
one?
Caesar?
No, one of the young Gracies is training with them.
Oh, Crone.
Cron Gracie. I went to the Starbucks around the corner from the gym and they said, oh yeah, all the boys come in all the time. They're so lovely. They're so sweet. This is an old lady telling me this. I love all the boys. There's a bullet hole in one of the doors down the bottom of in one of the windows. And I get there and Rudy Hernandez is there. So I interview Rudy Hernandez at the gym and he went, oh, he left 2 hours ago. This is Nate. And Nate says to me, and so I text Nate and Nate says, this is the first time I tried to get him. And he says, oh, brah, so sorry. I forgot to tell you, I'm down with my girl down on the bay by the water today. I'm at a party. And like, that's so Nate Diaz, but it didn't matter because I interviewed Rudy. He told me Nate was there earlier. He told me Nick was back in training. There's always something to pick up. You're just bookending that day when you finish that piece because it's an existence, as Josh will tell you. It's an existence and a calling as much being a writer as being a fighter. Nancy and I have had some amazing chats over the last few weeks, and sometimes like it's really nice to talk with someone that's trying to bring something out of you. Because I've forgotten a million things that I've done as well. But sometimes you just remember them while you're writing and you bring them into the story. I once went to interview the Scrap Pack. Nick Diaz, Nate Diaz, Gil Melendez, and Jake Shields at Cesar Gracie's in Concord. I interviewed them all. I waited a while for Nick. It's when I did that Kafkaesque interview with him, where I asked him one question. I chased him around for 5 hours in the gym. Asked him one question, he spoke for 45 minutes. But my one question to him was, Nick, I'm going to write the best story about you anyone's ever written. And I really like you and I have a love for you. And I feel that people don't understand you. I asked him one question. He spoke to me for 45 minutes. He poked me in the stomach and told me I should be gluten-free halfway through it, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. But I remember saying to Nate on the day, because he had to run off, he said, here's my cell number. And I said to him, Nate, if you don't answer the phone, I'll stick a fucking bomb under your car, yeah? And like, he kind of liked that. And I obviously don't mean that. And I want to make that very clear. I didn't mean that, but it was a bit of fun. But those moments of going and meeting those people, of doing those things, they just service you for the next time. And that's all I'm trying to say to Atticus is that be yourself, be unique, do it your own way. You're ostensibly at the moment, I know you're very young, but you know, I'm a talker and a communicator and I can't hold back, as you can see. I'm on Tequila 3 as well, but the point is, if you're an observer, get yourself into the opportunities where you really can observe, you know, just be there and observe and you'll find amazing things.
Yeah.
Very well put. And I was, if I could just comment on that. I think that the Gareth and I come at it from different angles. But I think the principles are kind of the same in that the raw materials are the same for everybody. this is why I've never understood sitting there in a press conference while everyone is staring at the people being interviewed and everyone's writing down the same thing. Like, I think it was Jonathan Snowden the other day said when he goes to these press conferences, he looks to the back of the room and tries to find the person who has nothing to do with the press conference. And I think that making it that explicit, I think, is a really good way to start while you're trying to find your voice and trying to find what your perspective is. Literally just go in the exact opposite direction of what everyone else's perspective seems to be, because I do think that the raw materials are all the same, and whether you're in this sort of investigative, immersive, active journalistic approach that Gareth takes, or more sort of like I just like to do sort of the interpretive, just watch a fight and whatever it makes me think about in terms of other issues or greater world or whatever it is, you really have to just train your brain to notice those things that are only there for your brain, whether it's making sure to include in your story that Nate Diaz said this thing that he's never said to anybody else, as opposed to just writing the same story that everyone writes about Nate Diaz, or trusting that while you're watching a Justin Gaethje fight, the thing it makes you think about, the fact that Justin Gaethje makes you think about all the President's Men, whatever it is, whatever the thing is, some weird movie or something. That's the little lifeline that is going to give your story and your career your own particular angle. And I think it's easy to not trust those things, because like as Gareth was saying, when everyone is writing the same story about John Jones, we're social creatures. The instinct to write a similar story is very strong. But if you write the exact opposite one and say, I've got an angle on John Jones that no one has ever thought about, and I know they haven't because it's just in my head, that has to be the principle. Otherwise, for me, it's the difference between being a writer / creator and just being a stenographer. And I just have no interest in being a stenographer.
To add to what Josh is saying as well, and this is why I'm always happy to have to write 250 word pieces sometimes, or 400 word pieces, or 450, 750, 800, 1000, 1200, 1400, 2000, 3000, 3500, is that at your age, Atticus, and it is worth doing this, and Josh kind of touched on it then without saying it explicitly, is if you are going in the other direction, because I do, at one's age, you don't need to write the news story because you're going to do that story in a different direction maybe the next day. Yeah, just you make sure you know what the news story is, though. Don't ever forget you need to know what the news story is, even if you don't do it. I mean, I'm not a big news guy myself, but enabling yourself to know what the news story is enables you to edit yourself for podcast, for radio, for smaller pieces, just so that you know why everyone else is doing that. I'm sure you'd agree with me on this, Josh. It's a fundamental, isn't it? So don't ignore what the news story is, but just know what it is. You don't need to be the person publishing it, but just be aware of where they're taking it. Like, I know why certain people are asking a question. Sometimes I'm deliberately asking a question at a press conference to get the two fighters arguing with each other, and I'm giving it to them. It's my gift to you. It's my gift to you, everyone else, because I know what they're going to do here. I'm not going to write it, but I know what they'll say, and that comes with a period of time. But being unique is not an ego thing. It's about awareness. It's about, you only find out, like you find out in writing and journalism, whether you belong as an editor, as a publisher, as a guy on the front line. I've been in this long enough. I could be in an office working. That's not where I'm suited. I'm suited on the front line. That's where I enjoy myself. I don't want to sit in an office, from 9 till 7, 8, 9 in the evening. You find out exponentially where you ought to be as a writer, and you only do that by experientially doing it. Do you know what I mean? Is that fair, Josh?
I think it's absolutely fair, and it's a great place to be as well, and to be young and doing it, because so you take 6 months, be the beat reporter, take 6 months, be the editorial guy, take the six.
Yeah.
You're right. You don't know what
You
there's
find
no reason
out,
to
don't
know.
you? You
Yeah,
find
you don't
out.
know you don't
find
know
out.
what you don't know what your language is, and you don't know what you love doing until you've done it.
Mm.
And I also tell Atticus, ask people, like, the only thing that they can tell you is no, but a lot of times you'll find people will say yes. If you say, like, I just want to come, work at your publication, or, I mean, like that, you have to kind of be the hustler in that point, right? A little bit.
Yeah.
And, and that's why just, asking friends, asking your professor if she knows anyone, and,
Listen, I still call myself a hustler, Nancy. I work for 5 or 6 different outlets. I'm a hustler, and I hustle.
I'm sorry about that at all.
And the other thing I'd say to Atticus is that I need an assistant sometimes, So, you can drive down to Vegas or whatever, and to come and spend a week around a big fight, is a good experience to do as well around a big fight week, and to attach. It probably wouldn't get paid for it to begin with, but is to get accredited and be in a big fight week and experience the rhythm. There's a rhythm to a fight week. I know I kind of have the air of a playboy in Las Vegas, but I mean it's only an air. I mean I've done the partying, but I work my nuts off in fight week. I do not stop. Radio, television, and writing, but it's a very UFC or a Bellator event or a big boxing event is very different. They're all very different. Like you tend to concentrate on just the main event in boxing, about these 2 guys, and you go narrow and very deep on these 2 guys and their teams. Whereas I think the information overload on a UFC event, I can't cope with it. I'm normally there covering it myself. So I'll pick one subject a day. I'll do one story a day. And as Josh was saying before, that enables me. I know before I'm going to do an interview with Holly Holm. I'm going to have my moment with John Jones, or I'm going to speak to Brandon Gibson, Winklejohn, and Jackson, and do a backstory on what's happened in the build-up. I'm not going to get around 9 people in a media day. You cannot do it, because you end up making yourself, you make yourself too thin in the end, And I'm sure Kevin Ioli and people like that have spoken about that on your courses, that just focus on the it's almost like having a plan before you go there, and just focusing on that. Fair, Josh?
I think it's great. Yeah, I completely agree.
I think it's
fascinating.
That you do need the plan before you go, but I was going to ask you, is there a story of a fighter that you would love to do? It would be the one that you've been searching for, or you have in your mind, like.
No, I'm just searching for love, Nancy. No, I'm always searching for love. Sorry, what was the question again?
Searching for love in Stockton.
No, in terms of, I was going to ask actually everyone here, is there an ultimate story that you'd like to cover, whether maybe even past or present, that you would like to work on, whether it's a biography of a fighter or something? But I then realized when you were talking, Gareth, that maybe it's the story comes to you, and I don't mean to be like hokey like that, but it's something that sometimes if you have an idea, you will miss an opportunity. I don't know. Or is there something, should you have some of those goalposts out there?
I think you might have to ask me that question again. I
know, it went everywhere. Okay. Is there someone, a boxer you'd love to write about, MMA fighter, that the story that you want to capture? And I said I thought maybe I second guess asking that, because you had kind of talked about how you should let the story come to you.
Yeah, I don't have one at the moment, I'll be honest with you. I think I've had a very fulfilling last few years. I mean, I'm very close to Tyson Fury. I get lots of access to Anthony Joshua. I have the great privilege of if I sometimes have to hustle a little bit to get interviews, but I don't think there's anyone out there at the moment
Mhm.
that I'm desperate to see. But the funny thing is, we always talk about, oh God, when are the next stars going to come? But they come. They always come. So I don't know at the moment, to be honest. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, I'm toying with the idea of, as you know, of writing an unauthorized biography about someone I mentioned just then. But you know, the Shane Cruchten, Krutchen, the Shane Cruchtons of this world are there. If you pick the leaves up, their names are there under the fallen leaves. They're just there. I mean, Nick Newell is an amazing story, for example. The one-armed fighter from Connecticut. Just extraordinary man. Extraordinary man. And it's not, you know, I interviewed French on Cruz Dezern the other day, who I find so beautiful. You know, the female WBC super middleweight champion of the world. She sings, she's been on American Idol. You know, she's married to a boxer. She's extraordinary. And like, she was so loving back to me after I'd interviewed her. Like just because I contacted her and did an interview. I mean, I think there are people everywhere, and I think I'm never surprised at how interesting people are in our industry, you know?
Yeah.
So the truth is, I don't know. There's no one I hanker after interviewing, you know, really. That's the honest answer.
Yeah. No, I have ideas of maybe writing like I'd love to write about like Elizabeth Wilkinson Stokes. Do you know a female boxer from the 1700s, in terms of understanding? But then you kind of got me there, Gareth, saying like there could be an Elizabeth at the local boxing.
There is. She's out there somewhere. Yeah, of course. And she might have 3 kids and be a single mum and be the most extraordinary, like Heather Hardy is at the moment. Extraordinary woman.
Brooklyn.
You know,
Yes. Yeah. This is great. Any last words, Josh?
I don't think so. It's been a pleasure. Gareth, we've never met before, but it's been an absolute pleasure talking. I love going inside baseball and to be able to do it. Sorry, there was a phone call coming in.
We just got your name. That was lovely.
Remember the name. Remember the name.
Josh.
But you know, as Nancy will attest to, like if I can go, you know, microscopic and inside baseball on both writing and fighting in the same conversation, I'm a pretty happy guy. So you guys just made my Friday.
No, I'm the same. I'm very and I joked about it earlier. I've had 30 years doing what I want to do, and I say that I've worked my nuts off as well. Don't get me wrong, Atticus. You know, I've dug the trenches. You know, I've done it a long time, and I think that's what I was talking about, body of work. But I feel very privileged that I get a certain amount of respect and access. Big word. We get amazing access in this industry. And I don't mean on a fight week. Sometimes we do, but there is humanity and access in this industry. It's a great privilege to be involved in doing something that, even on a day when you don't feel like doing it, or you're low, or you're ill, you're still in an industry that is fascinating, even though it's a tiny niche in society. I feel quite privileged to have done this for quite a long time and got to, you know, my children are grown up. I'm a granddad. You know, I'm solvent. I'm fairly sane. You know, and here we are. So, if you want to pursue it, do it. Just do it. But give it everything. But be patient with it, because I think a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with an apprenticeship for 7, 8, 10 years. I didn't make it on the radio and the television till nearly my 40s. You know. That persevere with it. If you love it, you'll never look back. That's how I feel about it, you know?
Yes. Well said. Don't let the Jordan rules bring you down. You know,
No, use the Jordan rules. Use the fuckers.
rules.
Make your own rules.
Make
your own rules.
There we go. We brought it home. And Atticus, you know, after COVID and, potentially Gareth, you could go and learn from someone like him. And that's unbelievable to have that experience. Any last words from Oregon, Atticus?
Just one last thing, Gareth. At the start of this, you were talking about how like MMA fighters are really kinetic, and you're also talking about your time kind of with like traditional martial arts. And I'm wondering whether like those people who take like 50 years, is there like more, is it more kinetic, or is there like something more or something
No,
different?
that's spiritual. I think it's spiritual, and I think it's cultural and historic, and I think it's something in their DNA. I think you got to remember. I always say America, and I think America's very good at mixed martial arts because it's still a pioneering country. It's still the Wild West. It's still, you know, people in America. I mean, I spent a lot of time in America. You know, I was with an American woman for a long time, and I think so I've been quite embedded in the culture, and it's a pioneering culture. There's no question about it, and I think that's why mixed martial arts will evolve quicker in America than anywhere else. You'll have the mainstays in the Far East and Southeast Asia and all those places, but it's evolving in America quicker than anywhere else. You look at the Bispings and all of those guys who, even the Brazilians, the Vitor Belforts, the Anderson Silva, where are they based? In America. They make their living there. The gyms are better there. They can lecture there. That's, it's no bigger than in America. It's the place to be if you're more interested in mixed martial arts. And the other thing is, if you're more interested in just mixed martial arts, get yourself into boxing as well, to write about boxing as well. They are very different sports, but the spirits and the people are the same. And I have paid off several houses by writing on both sports. And I give you that as fatherly advice, as I would give to my daughters or sons, is that don't ignore boxing just because you like MMA. Do both. There's very few of us doing both, and it's worth doing both sports because it's two avenues and two opportunities to make a living.
No, it's combat sports, again, we could talk about, for me, the literature of it goes back so long in the history, but I love that no matter what we talk about, Sports Illustrated, Deadspin, Josh, losing those, I don't care. Stories matter so much, and that's what unlike football where you don't even see the people's faces, it's a group, even other sports, there's something about combat sports where it's one person against another and they represent that viewer. So thank you.
Is Sports Illustrated gone?
Well, basically, would you say they got bought?
It's gone. It's all just video. It's just video content now.
Wow.
I think they may have a magazine, but it is a shell. All the writers either were fired or they left. That's another class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I write for two magazines, the Ring magazine, which I have for 12 years, and Fighters Only magazine. I'm a consultant editor, and it's hard work keeping it going, but it's a labor of love that you want to do. Because when you get the magazine every month and you can smell the paper,
yeah,
it's like there's something special about it. Look at the Diaz boys on the front.
Look at them.
It's a beautiful thing.
Atticus, do you know that feeling? Do you get magazines ever?
Not as much as I used to. Living in DC and across the country complicates that a little bit.
No, will you start buying fucking magazines, young man?
No, but it's interesting, and that but that's also, we have to make sure that we remember how valuable that content. We haven't even gotten into how social media might be taking the fighter's story, how fighters maybe like that control and connection to their fans, to their audience. However, I think that there's something about the writer coming in and helping them unlock their story, in a way that an observer.
That's a very good point, and Josh will I'm sure, agree on this, and I'm sorry to break in again, but it's a very, very well-made point that I've met very few fighters that can tell their story better than I can tell their story. And no.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
It's
and
not.
the thing is, when you get a deep interview with someone, Josh, and you write their story, and they read it, and they see it in the magazine, you're bonded forever because they realize you have a love for them in the way that you've written it, or an understanding of them, and it's a beautiful thing as a writer. That it's a really beautiful thing because they don't ever say it. No one's ever said it to me, but you just recognize that they appreciate how you've told their story because you understood them, you know?
No.
Yeah, I think to be really great at anything, especially something like fighting, I mean, like the best fighters in the world, I mean, like the level of absorption and the level of focus that is their life. I mean, that's not to say they don't have wives and children, but like to be great at anything, you look at Michael Jordan again, like there has to be a singularity of focus for so many years that to a certain extent, not only is it impractical, but I think for a fighter, it might be it's probably a little bit dangerous to have the kind of self-awareness and objectivity on yourself and a sort of camera outside yourself. I think that'll get you killed inside a cage. Like you should not be thinking about the reasons you're doing things or the motivations, but that's our job, you know. Fighters should be in there making sure they're not dying, and in order to do that, the focus has to be so great that they can't be thinking about what writers are thinking about.
Well, another thing that and just to add to that, and this is just writing and life advice for you, Atticus, and other students that may see this, is that a long time ago, one of the chief sports writer of the Telegraph, when I was a young pup, as we were called then in my 20s, he pulled me aside after I'd written a story one day, and he said it was really good. And he said, the key, Gareth, is that in that story you showed empathy. And if you don't have empathy, you can't be a great writer. You cannot be a great writer without empathy, because you need to be able to understand. It's what I was talking about earlier about understanding that someone is busted up and broken inside, and to have empathy is really important. So to never forget or to try to realize what other people are going through is a really important quality as a writer, you know? And I think even if you don't have it naturally, if you're not an empath, I think you can develop it, you know? And all you need to do is take one step away from your self-absorption and try and see it from someone else's perspective, as you were saying, the opposite there, Josh, of a fighter can't be a science empath or a science like a brilliant scientist or a self-psychologist, because if they really thought about it too hard, they wouldn't do it, you know?
Yep.
So
it's
true.
Totally true.
Well, we could do a whole another class on
well, let's start now then. And I've got nothing else to do. Let's start there. No, I think I have actually. I've got partying to do.
Oh gosh. Well, yes, London. Or are you in London? You're outside of London, right?
Stop prying into my private life, Nancy.
Well, thank you so much. We have to go have our tequilas now in the States here.
Seriously, we've been watching him drink for hours. It's time for us to join in.
And I owe you a bottle, post-COVID. But thank you so much, Gareth. I hope that this relationship with writing and fighting continues, and when we get back in the fall, we don't even, Atticus, we don't know what's happening with American, but I know. But we have this, and Atticus, thank you for, and Josh, I'm really excited to have these conversations. They're needed. They, as you say, Josh, that to have these kind of, inside baseballs, for me, it helps me figure out how to live as like Joan Didion. Like, why do I care so much about Diaz or what's going to happen with Usman on Saturday? And why does it help me function in life to know that people are out there writing about it, and I'm connecting to this community. So I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure, Nancy.
Well, thank you. Please join again. Remember, next Wednesday, we have our Muhammad Ali class, and that will be very interesting to bring in authors of Muhammad Ali. And I do maybe have a filmmaker who might be coming. I've told you, Josh. So
All right.
I will let you know. Gareth, let's talk again soon, please.
Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being so patient. I know I probably dominated about 75% of the airtime, but it was an absolute pleasure to talk with everyone. Atticus, I'm sure you'll do very well. I think you're a great observer. I would like to know, and I would like you to send Nancy an email on 10 things you learned today, because we definitely talked more, no, seriously, more than 10 things which are fundamental if you are to succeed in what you want to do. Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you today and chatting, and you're obviously a brilliant brain on writing and fight sports and sport in general. And Nancy, you're a doll. You're just a doll.
Thank you.
Gareth, total pleasure, man. Really lovely to talk to you, Gareth.
I take that. No, thank you. I'll think about you guys tomorrow while I'm watching the fights. You know, because I'll think about how I overthought everything today, and it'll make me happy. Again, take care, and please come again to Writing and Fighting.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Bye.